to order. Today is Thursday, July 25th. We're here at the Hilton Los Angeles Airport Hotel. You can see that I'm kind of lonely up here at the head table. Neither Mr. Famlet nor Mr. Silverman could be here, so I will be presiding today. So thank you. And I would just like to start with the roll call. Mr. Savoy, please.
Michael Savoy.
Jose Campos.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Nancy Corrigan.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Dan Jacobson.
Sochi Leon.
Alicia Burhow. Ms. Salazar.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Establishing that we have a quorum, I'd like to go on and make a few opening remarks. The California Board of Accountancy's mission is to protect consumers by ensuring only qualified licensees practice public accountancy in accordance with established professional standards. This mission is derived from the statutory requirement that protection of the public shall be the highest priority for the California Board of Accountancy in exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. Whenever the protection of the public is inconsistent with other interests sought to be promoted, the protection of the public shall be paramount. You may notice that some of our board members are referencing tablets during the meeting. The tablets allow the board members to more easily access meeting materials and are not being used to discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item with the board's jurisdiction. And has been kind of mentioned in the various committee meetings, we all need to remember to speak directly into the mic so that our audience and others maybe observing the webcast can hear us very well. So with that, I would like to move on to agenda item 1, report of the president. And taking care of that, I have a resolution for retiring Enforcement Advisory Committee member Jeffrey DeLizer, CPA. And I want to read that into the record. So this says Department of Consumer Affairs, California Board of Accountancy, resolution. Whereas Kenneth Jeffrey DeLizer, CPA, has faithfully served as a member of the California Board of Accountancy Enforcement Advisory Committee from July 21st, 2011 to July 31st, 2019, and whereas he served as chair and vice chair of the California Board of Accountancy Enforcement Advisory Committee, and whereas he presently serves as the chair and a member and previously served as the vice chair of the California Board of Accountancy Peer Review Oversight Committee, and whereas throughout his term of service at all times, Kenneth Jeffrey DeLizer gave fully of himself and his ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind, and whereas he has discharged these important responsibilities in a manner reflecting great credit upon himself in the accounting profession, and whereas his colleagues wish to express to him their high esteem and regard. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the members of the California Board of Accountancy express heartfelt appreciation to Kenneth Jeffrey DeLizer for the outstanding contribution he made during his term of service on the Enforcement Advisory Committee and the consumers of California. And do I have a motion to approve that resolution?
So moved.
And do I have a second?
Second.
Second. Do you have any other discussion from the board members? Any discussion from the public? Seeing that there is none, please call for the vote.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Sochi Leon?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
We're just going.
Carola Nicholson?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
And Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Thank you. So that is effective, and thank you, Mr. DeLizer. You have until July 31st, though, according to the certificate. Okay. Agenda item 1B, announcement of appointments to the Mobility Stakeholders Group. That is a written report in your materials, and we have our new appointees to that. Agenda item C, we're going to defer on that one to a little bit later when we have everybody ready for that. And I am going to now move to Agenda Item D, discussion and possible action on the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy and American Institute of Certified Public Accountants request for input on the evolving licensure model. Ms. Pierce?
Thank you. The National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, or NASBA, and the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, or AICPA, has released a request for input on the evolving CPA licensure model, which is provided as attachment 1. As mentioned on pages 1 and 2 of the agenda item, for approximately 2 years, NASBA and AICPA have been working on this topic, often seeking input from stakeholders regarding how the profession is changing. As a result of this ongoing work, a request for input was developed, specifically seeking feedback on the guiding principles that have assisted in the development of the new licensure model. The guiding principles are included on page 2 of the agenda item. Various stakeholders, including boards of accountancy, were asked to provide input on the guiding principles using the 2 questions that are also identified on page 2. Specifically, are these principles directionally correct, and would they help put the profession in a continued position of strength and relevance while protecting the public interest? This is the first time the CBA has engaged in formal discussions on this topic, and as such, staff are seeking input regarding any feedback that should be provided. Members have a few options on how to respond to this request. First, members can provide answers to all or some of the questions on the guiding principles that were identified. Members can provide a more general comment letter supporting or potentially not supporting the overall concepts contained in the guiding principles. Or members can decide not to respond to this particular request and await the next exposure draft that is targeted for release later in 2019. If members want to provide a comment letter, a motion would be needed to approve the issuance and could include the delegation for staff to work with the CBA president or another member to approve the final letter. And with that, I will turn it back over to Ms. Corrigan.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Ms. Pierce on this topic? Any ideas as to whether we want to provide feedback at this time or wait until we have more information available?
Yeah, it's a 2-year bill now, so it's kind of a moot point as far as I'm concerned. So, I mean, maintaining our watch position at this point, I think it would be fine.
Okay.
If I could just clarify on
Just
that.
saying.
This particular isn't a piece of legislation, so this is just a request for input from the national organizations regarding the
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
changing model for licensure.
Is that why you were looking at me weird?
Yes.
So this is what my perspective on this is that in theory, it makes sense. But some of the concerns that are being brought forward are impacting all industries, not just the accounting practice. So as I'm looking at this and potential recommendations that might impact future licensees, is I don't know what the downstream impact to these potential changes and requirements might have on our pipeline of future CPAs. Is it going to increase it? Is it going to reduce it? Is it going to impact certain communities more versus others? So for me, it was the need to see what level of assessment has been done on the potential implications of the future pipeline. I know that they don't want to impact folks that are currently in the pipeline, and I'm using the term pipeline as those that are still in school or, will be in school in the next couple of years.
Well, I know that this is a very huge and evolving topic, and I realize they would like input by August 9th, but as Ms. Pierce has pointed out, this is a very preliminary request with lots of information that will be forthcoming, so we may be well advised to just kind of wait and take action at a more appropriate time when we have information. Does that seem reasonable to the board? Mr. Campos?
Yeah, I think more to come. I know, a year ago, there was a lot of dialogue on this front at the NASBA meetings with a whole variety of thoughts, right? Technology, data analytics, computer sciences they're a big part of what CPAs are doing, and so the questions are more should the CPA exam change, and are there different tracks that people, can pursue to become CPAs? Maybe even adds to the confusion of GA and yet something else, some other category of experience that gets one to a CPA. So I'm more curious as to the more recent regional NASBA meetings. Was there a lot, I don't know who attended, was there a lot of dialogue on this front? What are we hearing from the other jurisdictions in terms of, comments or issues with this?
Right, and we will have that later on the agenda. Ms. Salazar and I did attend, Mr. Famlet did attend as well, who isn't here today, but these are far-reaching topics that I think are going to take quite some time before we have, anything we can really make decisions on.
So maybe understand there's another topic, but as it relates to this topic on the agenda, was there general support? Was there more confusion? What was the general sense we got from just observing that?
Ms. Salazar, would you like to add some comments to that?
I would. This is Katrina Salazar. Thank you very much. We did have several members in attendance at the regional meetings. These principles were presented, and there was robust discussion around them. It was surprisingly contentious, and there were many voices that had concerns about this wording. From my perspective, I believe this is meant to be broad and very forward-looking and very preliminary, but there were concerns by some stakeholders within those meetings where they had objections. I believe that is why this is on the agenda, to make sure that there are not specific concerns raised with this very general principles. And so that's I think the genesis of the ask for input. But I do agree there are many, many more discussions that need to happen, and this is certainly just a start.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that a comment letter of any kind at this point makes sense from our board. I think in California we've got some unique issues. We already have a 2-license track. We already have different experience requirements, for each of those licenses. There's a few more hurdles we're going to have than what a state that has a single license, a single experience, or no experience requirement, might encounter. And so it's probably a wait and see. But I think gathering or hearing from NASBA, I know we get these regular surveys or poll surveys that they do, and I guess to the extent that there's points on this topic, they might be good to coalesce them around it and pinpoint that on any future agenda topics on this front.
Okay, very good. And yes?
Ms. Pierce, did you say the next exposure draft is expected later in 2020?
Yes, that's what they've indicated, is that they intended, there wasn't a specific date unless it was maybe mentioned at one of the regional meetings, but there's one anticipated towards the end of 2019.
So then that would probably be the next time that we see this.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
they were saying either late 2019 or sometime into early 2020. So I think maybe then we can continue to gather information, then bring it to the forefront. Yes, please.
And there is a NASBA annual meeting in October, and this is going to be agendized for discussion at that annual meeting. And we've received approval for, 2 of our board members will be attending at least, and we're still seeking perhaps having another member attend.
Ms.
Katrina.
Salazar?
Thank you. Patty just handled my comment.
Oh,
Much
there you go.
appreciated.
Very good. Okay, thank you. Yes, Mr. Jacobson.
So I just wanted to make a comment on 2 issues in general about this, not specifically about when we would like just to put this out on the table. It seems like the information technology, I mean, the question is, are accountants supposed to know how to use a computer or why the computer works. And to the extent that it goes into how to use a computer, okay, that might be something of interest. But how the computer works is a change in the profession that I don't think is necessary. That's why there are computer engineers. And of course, accountants should also have to know how to audit information technology. But you don't have to know how the computer works, how the information technology works. You can have an expert who explains that, or you can. I don't think that's necessary to creating a grade for information technology. Secondly, while I appreciate that this would not affect current license, some sort of change here would not affect current licensees, I'm fearful that current licensees would therefore have a prejudice against them, because it might become knowledgeable that they do not have the knowledge and requirements that the new licensees have.
Yes, thank you. And of course, a lot of that is a big part of the discussion, IT technology, how to bring that into, bring exams, et cetera, the exam current with what's happening. And that was covered and will continue to be covered at these NASBA meetings, and we can keep a watch on all of that information. Any comments from anyone else?
Can I just add to Mr. Jacobson's comment? On the first page of attachment 2, it does indicate a listing of the skills that the future profession is looking for. And that would be business intelligence, data management, there's a bunch on here. Cybersecurity risk management, I imagine this type of stuff was not necessary in the past, and now it is because of the emergence of technology. And so, yeah, this is a hot topic.
Yeah. Hot and very complicated. Yes, Mr.
Just
Savoy.
one other thing to bring to light, since I was present at that NASBA roundtable breakout, which was quite contentious. They talked about being able to be a partner of a CPA firm. You don't have to have a CPA license.
Why was that?
California says
Really?
that as long as 50%, not more than 50% of your owners are CPAs, others can be partners of a CPA firm. So with that in mind, we said these tech geeks, or whatever you want to call them, could still be partners in a CPA firm without being a CPA. So you should also be aware of that.
Can I be a partner at your CPA firm?
You could if you qualify for some other expertise that we're looking for.
Well, and that's my, it's just my curiosity. Okay. Didn't know that.
Absolutely.
Certainly.
Okay. I'll talk to you then.
Good point.
Yeah, it was very contentious, and people were all over the place in those meetings. And to your point, you should understand that accountants for many years have been auditing around the computer. It's now important to audit through the computer, and this knowledge is very necessary. Whether you bring in experts or your accountants are experts in knowing your client's systems, it's very important, because fraud could be perpetrated because you do not know how it goes in and comes out. So, I just want to correct that. This knowledge is really essential at a very high level, because everybody has a computer now. So you have to understand how the information goes in and what you're fed for financial statement purposes have a direct correlation to understanding that computer system.
And especially when you consider the high volumes of information that are just kind of bouncing around in that system, and how it may be channeled or not channeled. So it sounded like at this point we leave it as a future agenda item. We don't need a motion for anything, and we can move on. Okay, agenda item 1E, discussion and possible action on the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy and American Institute of Certified Public Accountants exposure draft on standards for continuing professional education programs. Ms. Pierce?
Thank you. Before I begin, I want to mention that there is a revised attachment 3 that was sent in the second mail out. There's a reference to revised on the attachment, and these are the correct version of the proposed regulatory changes that are pending with DCA right now. You may not need to reference them during my presentation, but I wanted to make sure that you had the correct attachment.
The CBA will be asked to review and discuss the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, or AICPA, and National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, or NASBA, jointly issued exposure draft on the Statement on Standards for Continuing Professional Education Programs, which I will refer to as standards, and which are included as Attachment 1. The CBA will be asked to determine if a comment letter should be submitted in response to the proposed standards. The AICPA and NASBA jointly issue the standards, which provides a framework for the development, presentation, measurement, and reporting of continuing education programs. The standards were last revised in 2016. Although many of the CE program requirements outlined in CBA regulations mirror the standards, the CBA maintains independence in the establishment of the minimum program requirements for acceptable CE in California. So I want to focus my presentation on only the standards that could impact CBA regulations, which include identifying a new category of learning and then minor changes to nano learning. As referenced on page 2 of the agenda item, a standard is being proposed for consideration of a new category called adaptive learning self-study. CBA regulations do not presently include this type of learning format. The standards define the adaptive learning self-study program as a program that uses a computer algorithm or other predictive analytics tools to orchestrate interaction with the learner and deliver customized learning activities to assist the learner in meeting the course's stated learning objectives. A regulation change would be needed to allow for this type of learning format. The second change for consideration relates to nano learning and proposes to remove the reference to it being a tutorial program and be redefined as a program designed to permit a participant to learn a given subject in a minimum of 10 minutes and less than 20 minutes through the use of electronic media without the interaction with a real-time instructor. The CBA has a pending rulemaking package to incorporate nano learning into CBA regulations. The pending regulations do not include a reference to nanning learning as a tutorial program, so no change is needed with the terminology. However, a regulation change would be needed to modify the proposed time allotment. Once the CE model standards are final, they will be presented to the CBA to determine what, if any, changes the CBA would like to adopt into regulations. That would include the adopting adaptive learning self-study and modifying the time parameter for nano learning. Attachment 4 is a proposed comment letter. If the CBA makes a motion to issue a letter and wishes to include additional topics, staff recommend authority be delegated to the CBA president or another member to approve the comment letter for submission by the conclusion of the comment period. And that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Ms. Pierce?
I have a question.
Yes.
Ms. Pierce, when is the final draft expected?
I would need to, I will have to confirm that and get back to you. I'm sorry, I don't have that right here.
Oh, that's okay. And then one more clarification from me. This is also an exposure draft. Is this a different exposure draft from the one we just covered in the previous agenda item?
Is it? Yes, this one's on CE. The other one was on the evolving.
Yes, I understand that. But
Oh,
are these
the
sort of like documents that come together? And are they part of like a volume of exposure?
They're on two different topics, so these wouldn't necessarily interact.
So two separate and distinct exposure drafts?
Yeah.
Yes. Was there a question over here? Yes, Mr. Jacobson first, please.
So, I don't mean to put you on the spot here. If the answer is that you don't have one, then you don't have one. But do you have an example of a subject that is learnable in under 20 minutes?
They've actually done some demos on the nano learning at the NASBA regional meetings when they were first launching this. And I'm trying to reflect back onto what it was, but I think they had some on, I think there were some quick 10-minute ones just like on an ethical situation with regards to computer access and direction. But that would be what I recall. I can get more confirmation and provide follow-up on that.
Perhaps I should look for conceptually, is it, when I think a subject that I think maybe of a semester on a particular topic, is it more of a practice that on how to do something? You know, if you're so the situation may be, I think we've all, or many of us have recently taken the anti-sexual harassment training program. That takes a long time, but maybe it's 10 minutes with a particular scenario. Would that be right?
Yeah, there's
Yes.
a number of bite-sized things. Like, as a firm, we do this quite a bit in different areas, and so they have to be bite-sized chunks of something, right? And some quick learnings you want to push out, either ethical situations. Tax has some particular items that kind of go out in little bite-sized pieces. So I think it's just an area that's evolving, and our younger folks, grab these in different ways, and you're able to do some of this on the go.
And just
Thank
to,
you. My concern was I didn't want to dumb things down, and it doesn't sound like that is the case.
And just to clarify, the board has already they've already adopted the nano learning format, and those regulations are pending. This would just be making a modification to the time allotment on that.
Correct. Ms. Nicholson? Yes.
The nano learning is a minimum of 10 minutes, but no more than 20 minutes, but the allotment of credit is still at the 10-minute time frame, 1/5.
So my question is, so we have a 20-minute now allotment, what was the change in the time?
They changed it to allow a minimum of 10 and no more than 20, so they added on that 20 portion of it, but you're still getting the 1/5 credit.
Okay. Yes, please.
Maybe just to go back and maybe provide a bit of clarification. So Ms. Pierce made reference to the UAA, the Uniform Accountancy Act, and that's a model document that NASBA has created that covers many areas: education, continuing education, examination, and so that's a model used. Some states use that as their rules. They just adopt that in its entirety. In California, what we do is anytime there's a proposed change to the UAA, the Uniform Accountancy Act, is we bring that forward, we do a comparison with California regulation, and then bring that to the board to decide whether or not the changes in the exposure draft to the UAA is something we want to incorporate into our rules and regulations. So very often in the exposure drafts, what they're proposing would be too vague to really fully implement in California. So it's just generally high level, and then we will look at that. But most of the time, if we're going to incorporate it into California regulation, we would have to better prescribe the requirements, because in order to really get that regulation passed so that it's clear, there's no ambiguity. And so often when you see these come forward, if you're recognizing this isn't clear, and that would be one of the steps we would have to take to make it more clear in California, if that helps.
Any further discussion from board members? Any discussion from the public on this? So staff have recommended the comment letter in attachment 4. And do I have a motion to accept that letter?
So moved.
Do I have a second? Any other discussion now that we have a motion and a second, or from the public? Seeing that there is none, please call for the vote, Ms. Reed.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar, Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion, and we'll go ahead and send that letter. Thank you very much. I'd like to go back to agenda item C, which is an update, discussion, and possible action on cannabis-related legislation. And during our prior meeting, the California Board of Accountancy asked staff to invite State Treasurer Fiona Ma, Senator Robert Hertzberg, and Assemblymember Joan Sawyer to discuss Assembly Bill 1525 and Senate Bill 51, which relate to the cannabis industry. Okay. We are very fortunate today to be joined by Assemblymember Reginald Jones Sawyer, Sr., and Mr. Blake Johnson, a legislative analyst with the Office of State Treasurer Fiona Ma. I want to thank you very much for being with us here today. Assemblymember Jones Sawyer is the author of Assembly Bill 1525, which would create a safe harbor under state law for financial institutions and accountants that provide services to the cannabis industry. State Treasurer Fiona Ma is the sponsor of Senate Bill 51, which creates limited-purpose state-chartered banks and credit unions licensed to provide certain financial services to the cannabis industry. At this time, I'd like to invite our guests to join us at the table, please. And if you would, once you get seated, please just introduce yourselves to us.
Good morning. I'm a morning person, as you probably can tell. I'm a Assembly member, Reginald Byron Jones Sawyer Sr. I represent the 59th Assembly District, which is South Los Angeles.
Okay, thank you. Please.
Hello? Okay. I come in, sorry. Blake Johnson, here on behalf of State Treasurer Fiona Ma, the legislative analyst, been working on public policy for the Treasurer this past year and previously for State Treasurer John Cho.
Thank you. So I'd like to begin with comments from Assemblymember Jones Sawyer about 1525. Following his remarks, members, each of us, will have an opportunity to offer comments or ask questions, and after that we will allow comments or questions from the public. Then Mr. Johnson will offer comments regarding SB 51, again followed by CBA questions or comments, and then of course comments from the public. At the conclusion of all discussion and comments on both bills, we will consider whether to adopt a new position on these bills. Currently, our position is a watch position on both bills. Assembly member, would you please begin with your remarks on AB 1525?
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. AB 1525 would create a safe harbor under state law for financial institutions and accountants that provide services to the cannabis industry. AB 1525 would do two things. First, the bill would help banks better comply with federal reporting requirements. Despite the conflict between the federal and state law on cannabis, it is possible for financial institutions to provide services to the industry. Only 486 banks and credit unions in the nation are currently banking to cannabis businesses. Institutions that choose to bank for cannabis businesses must comply with rigorous monitoring and reporting requirements and accept a significant amount of risk. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network requires that banks serving the industry file suspicious activity reports to ensure that a business does not violate any state law or is not engaged in any illegal activity. These requirements are burdensome and demanding on staff resources at financial institutions. We do that. That's what government does. AB 1525 would allow state licensing authorities or the California Cannabis Joint Powers Authority to share a business track and trace information and other regulatory information with the business's bank at the request of the business. The track and trace system tracks all cannabis products from cultivation to sale. This information, along with other regulatory information, can be used by financial institutions to verify that every transaction associated with the business product is legal under state law and ease the burden of complying with FinCEN reporting requirements. Second, the bill would codify protections under state law for financial institutions that serve the cannabis business and industry. AB 1525, similar to legislation passed in Washington State, will create a safe harbor under state law to protect financial institutions and accountants that provide services to the industry. Specifically, this bill would clarify that providing banking or accounting services to the cannabis industry is not, I repeat, is not a crime. I believe doing so will encourage more banks and accountants to provide services to the industry. As you know, the industry is currently operating in all cash, unfortunately. Banking services are crucial for the safety of the industry's employees and our communities at large. It is also in the interest of the state that this industry has access to accounting services so that businesses know how much money they owe to the state in taxes. That's real important for me. My goal in moving this bill is to increase this industry access to basic services that provide public safety and ensure proper tax collection. Currently, AB 1525 is a 2-year bill. I am working with Assembly Business and Professions Committee to address some concerns they had with the policy, and hopefully we can move this bill in January 2020. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, you have any questions for Assemblyman? Yes, Mr. Jacobson.
Assemblymember, so I love the bill. In general, I have a specific issue that I think may have been an oversight. I'm looking at subsection F, and it says that a certified public accountant or a certified public accounting firm is not committing a crime when they service the industry. We license CPAs and PAs, public accountants, and I would like them included. I suggest that they be included here too, because they shouldn't be. They're not committing crimes.
Okay, so it would be CPAs and
public accountants. And it might be, because I don't know in the California's 26 codes if there's some other place, because there's an implication that if you put one of a class in and you don't put the other of a class in, there's a statutory construction implication that says that the other one doesn't belong there. So it kind of strengthens the idea that there's a public accountant crime. I don't know if this.
I agree, and more important, if you know of any others, let me know, because otherwise I'll have to do another bill, add them into next year, and then another one the year after that. So if I get them all at one time, or you provide me a list that your organization feel comfortable with and approve, I would love to take that to B&P where the changes will be made.
You're very kind, and because I don't know if there's something in the water bill that talks about only CPAs and not PAs. I thought maybe the language should be something like an accountant license under the whatever our code, Business and Professions Code section. I think it's 5,000 and SEC or something like that, so that you don't have to specifically name these things, and we're not accidentally causing a problem in, the water code or something.
If you could work together to provide me some language that you feel comfortable with, I would, and thank you for catching that. I mean, that's the whole point of having committees and having this discussion.
You're very kind, and I think you've presented it excellently.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions?
I have a question. Hi, thank you for joining us this morning. The track and trace, is that like a barcoding?
It's barcoding. In fact, it's a pretty intricate system. They're still trying to perfect it, because we're talking about tracking and tracing from the plant itself all the way to cultivation and then point of sale. So we want to make sure track and trace is not only for tracking everything that's grown up in the triangle, which is where the majority of the cannabis, I would like to say the best cannabis in the world is grown. We want to make sure we track that, but obviously we want to make sure no illegal, people who don't have a license, they don't get their hands on it. But not only track that, but make sure when we do the testing, which is really important, we're tracing that so that when it finally gets to the consumer, we know that there's nothing in it that could be harmful, pesticides and other harmful agents in it. So that track and traces is brand new, and we're still trying to perfect it right now.
Is it similar to like the way we track lettuce right now, or strawberries?
Exactly the way we track lettuce. We don't, the beauty of this is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We just have to go to ag and start with them. But since this is a substance that could get you a little, I'll use the word high, there's some requirements there that makes sure, we want to make sure we have even more stringent requirements, even though I'm not saying bad lettuce we should just let through, but we should even have more rigorous tracing on this than regular produce.
And I think also it's because it applies to, adults, right, 21-year-olds.
Yes.
And there isn't, anybody can eat lettuce.
Correct, and if someone that is not of age, nice to be able to track it back to the source.
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for the Assembly member?
Hi, thank you, Assemblymember, for being here. What do we need to do? So this is coming back in January. What do we need to do to help you possibly get this over the finish line passed? Because I personally think this is unacceptable that we have legalized cannabis in the state and we don't have a safety net. So, but you've been dealing with a lot of pushback on a lot of ways. What are some of the ways that maybe we can help you with this?
Maybe I can just do it this way, how this all, I've had several bills providing protections
Right.
because of our state laws, which are in conflict with the Schedule 1 and with the federal government. So when Attorney General Jeff Sessions was first nominated and eventually appointed, one of the first things he said was he was going to prosecute anyone in California that was involved in this industry.
Right.
I think his boss probably had a different idea. I get the feeling he's not as strong on prohibiting people from using cannabis as he was. And so my first bill was to create what's called, they called it the Cannabis Sanctuary State, but it was really saying law enforcement shouldn't cooperate with the federal government if they're going to come in and try to shut down a legal business that was voted on by the citizens of California. I was told by the governor at that time that was Jerry Brown,
Right.
and he probably was one of our best governors. He told me, just wait, this will go away. I didn't think he meant he would go away, but evidently he knew something I didn't know.
Right.
And eventually Sessions stopped talking about coming after cannabis, so I shelved my bill, and now you hardly hear anything from the federal government about coming after. This bill is necessary because it's your license.
Yes.
The other one's necessary too because people are putting up money and capital and to start a business, and they could lose everything and their houses and homes and their financial stability. But you worked hard for your license. Banks worked hard to put up these financial institutions, and they're not doing anything that the state of California hasn't told them they can do. So this is to provide that certainty. I don't know why it became a 2-year bill in B&P, Business and Professions. Sometimes it's just politics, and sometimes it's not, but I have not gotten any feedback to say, we have a problem with this or that. It's been like radio silence. So what I can suggest, if your organization is so inclined to endorse or to push or to make calls or to go to Sacramento, if you have a lobbying group, to go to Sacramento and lobby on behalf of the bill with amendments, please do that. I think that will have the biggest impact, because it's business and professions.
Correct.
It's about professions. If they see that this is really about keeping a thriving industry protected. I think it'll get through, and the reasons that it's a 2-year bill will probably go away, and we'll be able to get this passed. The unfortunate thing is it won't become active in 2021.
Right.
But hopefully we don't have anyone wanting to mess with us. Hopefully by 2021, it won't be Schedule 1 anymore, and we can bank 2.
Yeah.
Which will really be great.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other, yes, please.
Thank you, Assemblymember, for coming to join us today. I just wanted to ask, have you gotten any feedback from financial institutions or from the, the professional associations within the financial industry?
So all financial institutions are very grateful. Unfortunately, as I read the numbers, and there's about 400, 500 institutions, and I'll use this word, that are brave enough to go ahead and make this leap. Even people in your profession, you've got to be a little brave to go out there and do that, knowing that the federal government may come in and snatch your license. You've got to go on faith. And I think we'll get more and more institutions that want to do this and hopefully use this law to give them that umbrella. So if they do go to court, they can use this law as this is why we did it. They got the safety net from 1525, and hopefully that stands up in court. They can use that because we don't know what the federal government will do at some point. And so the banking industry is very grateful for it, and I think we may increase that number because of this law. But how many more, I don't know. But it's still a federal thing. Look, we're at 27 states that have legalized. We get to 37. The states can petition to force the federal government to vote on this. And if you got 37 states, what is that? That's more than half the U.S. senators. That's 2/3 of the U.S. senators, 2/3 of Congress. We have a pretty good chance of repealing everything. And then last I'll leave you with is, look, 10 years from now, we'll be laughing that we had this conversation.
Right, exactly. Board members, any other questions for our Assembly member? If not, any questions from the public for our Assembly member? Mr. Johnson, would you like to cover Senate Bill 51 for us, please?
Certainly. Thank you all for your time, and thank you to Assemblymember Jones Sawyer for his leadership as one of the leaders for modern-day cannabis policy. As we all know, Proposition 64 allowed legalized recreational marijuana in the state, but did nothing to address the lack of financial services. And as we know, some of you may know, the cannabis industry has been expected to generate more than $8 billion annually with the passage of Prop 64. However, without incentivizing the industry to enter into the legal market, we're going to continue to fall short of this very attainable projection. And according to the LAO, Legislative Analyst's Office, after the first 6 months of 2018, California received $101 million less in tax revenue than was forecasted. This is due in part to the significant tax burden coupled with the lack of access to safe, reliable banking. And more recently, in May, the Department of Finance slashed $200 million from cannabis revenue in the budget that was signed in July. Standard oversight and accountability measures like audits become very difficult when most transactions are completed in cash. Additionally, these businesses face security risks because of the volume of cash in their possession. The Treasurer has seen firsthand the horror stories from industry folks in our former BOE district being run off the road, robbed at gunpoint, and being violently overtaken because everyone knows this industry has to pay everything in cash, and they have nowhere to put this cash that's safe. The Treasurer has been actively involved in finding a viable way to bank the cannabis industry for years now, most recently serving on the Cannabis Banking Task Force from the previous Treasurer, John Chung. Senator Hertzberg has provided a progressive approach to such a looming problem with SB 51, of which Assemblymember Jones Sawyer is a co-author of. SB 51 will provide for the licensure and supervision of cannabis limited charter banks and credit unions, also known as CDIs, authorized to offer limited depository services to cannabis business. And it provides 4 key points for basic services: to issue certified checks and conduct payroll for certified California employees, pay their state and local taxes and fees, while lessening the burden on local government to collect and manage large sums of cash, pay their rent, and invest in California's economy by purchasing bonds and other debt instruments. SB 51 is a necessary real solution to get cash off the streets, heighten public safety, and increase tax collection and transparent auditing of the monies from cannabis and incentivize compliance.
Okay, thank you. Board members, do you have any questions for Mr. Johnson? Yes?
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
So, first of all, I want to thank you and Treasurers Chung and Ma for being on this, and you Assemblyman also. These are questions. Why not have special checks for employers, owners, and maybe others? When I say owners, I don't know if it's going to be a corporation or a sole proprietorship, or some sort of draw. It seems like the employees was what I was most concerned about, that they're going to be paid in cash, and I don't know. Is there a reason for not having a special check for like that?
For an employee of a dispensary or cannabis grow?
Yes.
So as I understand it, they can still be drawn a check. They'd be listed under, my understanding is under a vendor, or let me go back to that. A California employee that's licensed to work at this dispensary.
I must have missed that. Thank you.
Yeah, it would be issued a certified check that could only be used at CDIs, not any other bank that touches the federal wire.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Yes?
Thank you. Mr. Johnson, I have a question. I wonder whether other states have these types of limited charter banks and credit unions.
So I did some research, and I've seen some legislation that's moving along. I want to say Washington is moving something along. I'm not sure whether or not that's going to come to fruition. Alaska tried to do a state bank, and then Oregon also has, they already have a process in place to allow for taxes to be paid electronically, but there's varying factors as it relates to the infrastructure set up in Oregon compared to California. Much larger market here, but this isn't, this isn't necessarily an original idea. Other states have potentially looked into this, but we haven't seen this come to fruition yet, and we don't see a model to replicate.
So no other state has this in place already?
No.
And I do understand if all of this is legalized
Then-
federally, these banks would become regular banks.
Yeah, so you have 30 days from a triggering event, which is being descheduled, which is the MORE Act. Kamala Harris just announced this past Tuesday, which would deschedule cannabis, among other things. And then another triggering event was the Safe Banking Act, which is moving through the House right now. It's going to go for a vote in a couple months. It's the furthest it's ever gone.
Wow.
And it's 3 years, Representative Perlmutter. I'm trying to think here. So the Safe Banking Act would allow for banks to deal with the cannabis industry. So in the event that those two events happen, DBO, would issue guidelines in 30 days of how that would happen. They would have a year to dissolve. They would dissolve, or they'd be bought out. Assets would be sold. But again, we're seeing a lot of progress federally as it relates to cannabis. But again, historically, I'm knocking on wood here, hoping I'm incorrect, but federal legislation only has a 4% success rate. So we're seeing progress. There was a hearing in the Senate this past Tuesday, but a lot of members didn't show up. But there definitely is a hot topic. Again, like some member said, 37 states have cannabis, so eventually something's going to have to happen. And we are seeing more movement compared to years past.
Thank you. I had another question as
Yes.
well. Regarding the advisory board, the members that would comprise of this advisory board seem to be very, maybe, is there an option to perhaps include more public members as part of this advisory board?
Okay. I'm actually not certain, but I can definitely discuss and I can follow up with you.
Or I guess I would like to know if you have any insight for how it was chosen that these members would comprise of the advisory board.
I think initially, the main reason is, one, state treasurer, we manage the state's debt, state's finances, state controller, pays the state's bills, chief of Bureau of Cannabis Control is cannabis related, and then anything finance is always going to be DOF as a non-voting member. And the whole goal was to kind of keep it as a narrow scope in terms of who would be on the board, because those are like the three highest ranking members that relates to finance for the state. But again, that's definitely something to be discussed.
And can I ask, when you said make it more public, do you mean like have business owners involved? Do you mean have growers involved? Do you mean
Appointees.
people who are affected by it also have a voice at the table?
Exactly. I would like to see people that are, day-to-day
They're
in
impacted.
it, perhaps be able to provide guidance within the purview of this advisory board, being that they are firsthand in the business.
I probably speak because I worked with the city for 25 years and I'm a recovering bureaucrat. So I can say not have it all bureaucrats. It's some real people.
Yes.
I can say that.
I appreciate that.
I would just say maybe stakeholders, like, stakeholders, yes, and a class of appointees who are comprised of stakeholders of different, different types.
That makes sense.
So I just reviewed the bill, and I don't think I did miss. I don't think that there is a section regarding employees being able to cash a special check. And specifically, I'm looking at section 11050B, which seems to have the list of people, entities that are allowed to cash the check. So I'm supportive of this, but I would recommend that perhaps you go back and think about that.
Definitely. I'll follow up with you.
Thank you so much.
Certainly.
Ms. Burhow?
Yeah, I just had a clarification. So if this bill were to get through, would it be kind of on par to be implemented around the same time as your bill? Like 2021 or?
So it actually has it's got an urgency clause.
Okay, so it would be, okay.
Assuming it gets signed by the governor, which it was very close to getting signed last year.
Right. And it would probably make your bill easier to get through too. All right.
I would think so. Any other questions for Mr. Johnson from the board? Yes.
Question. Can you comment on some of your opposition and what were the points?
Okay, one moment. I think I had something right here. So one issue or one argument regarding having this bill was, okay, what's the point of it? Because we're seeing traction, the momentum in the federal level. Well, we argue that it still is an uphill climb, and we can deal with that once that happens. But we also have parameters in the event that it does. So we're still being proactive. That's one. Then the second point that they made regarding us directly was the cost associated with standing this up as it relates to the controller's office, the treasurer's office, Bureau of Cannabis Control. Well, DOF reached out to us about a week ago, and we see little to no fiscal impact as it relates to creating this. It's just going to be a board seat. There won't be any added division in our office or the controller's office or Department of Finance. Primary funding will be going to DBO to draft regulations and further stand this up. But those are like the main two argument points that I've seen.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from board members? Any questions from the public? Okay. If not, then members, as a reminder, we previously adopted a watch position on both Assembly Bill 1525 and Senate Bill 51. If we wish to maintain these positions, then we do not need an action. However, if we wish to change our position, we would require a motion and we would require a second. So does any member have a motion they wish to make?
So I'm very concerned about the amendment to protect the public accountants, but if we say that we support so long as amended, does that weaken your argument?
We say that all the time. That we get that all the time, that interest groups will say they support as amended.
Okay.
So that's perfect, that's done all the time.
In that case, I move to support
As amended.
as
If amended?
I've recommended amended to protect public accountants, SB.
Sorry, 1520, that's 80, 1525.
Yeah,
I'm an A, we're in the larger
You're in the
house.
The AB.
Very good.
Sorry, the green carpet bill.
So your,
That's my motion.
so your motion is to support if amended?
Yes, just if amended to protect public accountants also, as discussed.
Okay.
And I just think it should be done in separate.
Motions?
Unless you
Okay.
want me to do it all in one motion, I'm fine.
We probably should have separate motions, shouldn't we? Okay, so please state your motion clearly as to which, specifically, which bill you're referencing.
I'm referencing AB 1525, which, and I move that we support it as amended to protect public accountants also.
Okay, do I have a second for this motion? So there's a second. Any further discussion from board members?
Yeah, it hasn't been determined that other groups aren't affected, such as enrolled agents. So I don't support what you're saying, but allow to do the research for us to mention all groups that should be included.
Right.
Because your motion was very specific, and it has to be a little broader.
Well, I was just dealing with our licensee population, and there might be other types of professions that are involved, but our bailiwick is our licensee.
I would like to ask that a letter that is drafted be circulated to the board for approval, but I think that the letter should be drafted by staff to capture the intent behind the amendment. And I think that the staff can more clearly articulate in the letter the categories of professionals who are intended to be covered by or intended to be protected by the bill. And so I think the staff is probably in a better position to make sure that it covers the intention that's been expressed here. And then we as a board can review it and then approve it as written.
Okay, so then that might defer that motion to the next meeting.
Since this is a 2-year bill.
So we have a chance to-
There's not a sense of urgency.
We won't talk about until January. So
Oh, well, so
Yeah, okay.
we have time.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest that, Mr. Savoy, since you have additional people that you think would be appropriate to be included, if you would let staff know. And that way, when it comes back to the board, the letter will have everybody in there. That's appropriate.
Okay. So for,
On that, as that suggestion seems to be a very good one, agreed to by the assembly member, I withdraw my motion, and I suggest that the category for professional that staff reference be those who are involved in the financial industry as service providers.
okay, very good. So the motion has been withdrawn, so we'll just maintain a watch position on Assembly Bill 1525. Regarding Senate Bill 51, do board members?
I second that.
Second, okay. Any further discussion from members?
A similar, I think the bill should be circulated, I mean, the letter should be circulated to the board before it's sent
Okay.
into work.
I'm not sure there wasn't a suggestion for an amendment.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
So no real technical corrections on
we
that
didn't
one like
see
we
them on-
might have for the
Yes.
other one.
I withdraw.
So I have any other discussion from
Just a
board?
real quick question for for SB 51, so that's going to be hitting business and professions.
Oh, it already passed out.
It already passed
It's
out,
currently
so
in
is it?
appropriations.
Oh, so it's going to go to appropriations
Yep.
and then,
Then
okay,
from there, hopefully to the governor's desk.
okay.
Got really
That
close
that
last
one
time.
we could take on.
Do we know when that appropriations meeting happens?
When do you guys go back? When do you come back from break? I forget. So mid-August? August 12th.
August
So
12th.
it'll probably, around that time, it'll probably be, it'll be assigned as to when it was going to be hearing, so when it'll be heard.
So
And
three
then
more
after
steps.
appropriations, it goes to the governor's desk?
Goes to the floor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if
Any
there's
other-
no amendments, then it'll just go, it won't go back to the Senate at all, it'll just, okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Any other discussion between, or from the members? Any discussion from the public?
I have a question. So this has been before the Ledge Committee before, but what was rationale for not having gone to support and maintaining watch before? I just don't
Yeah.
recollect not having been a.
I don't-
I think people just have questions.
Was really to seek the direction from the board before staff proposed a specific position, because it wasn't something that the board as a body had really opined on.
Okay, very good. Then, and given that, I think we're ready to call for the vote on Senate Bill 51.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Katrina Salazar,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Abstain.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines,
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Burhouse.
Yes.
Very good. Motion carried. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much. Very, very informative discussions that helped us with our decision-making and also to uncover some other questions maybe that, need to be considered in going forward. Thank you again.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to continue then with agenda item 1F, discussion and possible action on the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants exposure draft on the proposed interpretation of the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants Code of Professional Conduct, staff augmentation arrangements interpretation. Mr. Franzella?
Thank you. Thank you and good morning. The purpose of this agenda item is to provide the CBA an opportunity to review and discuss the AICPA exposure draft related to a proposed interpretation of the AICPA Code of Professional Conduct on staff augmentation arrangements. And the exposure draft is attachment 1 to your materials. The CBA is being asked whether it wishes to issue a comment letter to the AICPA on the exposure draft. This item is before the CBA at the request of a member. The AICPA Code of Professional Conduct is a set of professional standards that licensees are required to follow when practicing public accountancy. And this particular exposure draft was released in December of 2018. The new interpretation being proposed relates to staff augmentations, which relates to a non-attest service and the audit accounting firm lends staff to the client to perform certain services. The AICPA noted that such services may create threats to independence and has included in the new interpretation safeguards to reduce the threats. And the safeguards that the AICPA identified, we have incorporated in the paper and they can be seen on page 2. NASBA, back in February, issued a comment letter and noted several concerns regarding the proposed interpretations, and NASBA's letter is in attachment 2 to the item, and the concerns themselves are also noted in the materials on page 2 near the bottom. Based on the feedback that the AICPA received during the original comment period that ended back in March, it agreed to extend the period to obtain feedback from various boards of accountancy via NASBA. So staff have reviewed the exposure draft to determine how the new interpretation would affect existing regulations. As the AICPA Code of Conduct is a professional standard which licensees are held to, the new interpretation related to independence, if adopted, would be allowable. NASBA did raise concern with its enforceability of the new interpretation, specifically the subjectivity of the proposed safeguards. While it would be difficult at this time for me to assess the overall enforceability of a new interpretation, there is considerable subjectivity with what the AICPA is proposing, which may have a significant impact on our ability to, the Enforcement Division and then the CBA's ability to enforce that new interpretation. As to the practical application, the newly proposed interpretation would have on the practice of public accountancy, the CBA should assess whether the interpretation advances the CBA's mission of consumer protection. Staff recommend that the CBA evaluate the exposure draft to determine if the proposed new interpretation has an adverse impact on its mission of consumer protection, and if so, to consider issuing a comment letter. If the CBA chooses to issue a comment letter, staff requests the CBA provide direction on information to include in the letter and assign a CBA member to work with staff in the preparation of a comment letter for signature by the CBA president. With that, I would like to turn discussion back over to the Secretary Treasurer, and I'm happy to answer any questions members may have.
Members, any questions for Mr. Franzella? Okay. So, any ideas on what we would like to see happen as far as a possible response to this?
Katrina, may I comment?
Please, thank you.
So this is Katrina Salazar. So, my comment to this is just to call the board's attention to the letter that was sent out by NASBA at the beginning of the year. So it's February 25th, it is attachment 2. NASBA has, after caucusing various stakeholders, developed this position through their processes and have been raising concerns with staff augmentation. After being challenged on those and asked about the support of the various individual states, NASBA caucused folks through breakout sessions in the regional meetings. So the reason I think my concern is that it would be important if California Board of Accountancy has concerns about staff augmentation. I personally do, that we just confirm that whether or not we're support staff augmentation or see it as a consumer protection issue. For my own opinion, I see it as a challenge for our mission of consumer protection and creating a lot of difficulties at the licensing level. They try to implement these rules that are subject to a wide latitude of interpretation, as I read them. So, don't know that we need a comment by comment, but my goal would be to get some response back saying, does the board think this is good or bad for our mission of consumer protection?
So any board members have any further comments or comments to what Ms. Salazar is suggesting? Yes, please.
I think Ms. Salazar is the committee member who should be requested to
Write our stuff.
work with staff on writing the letter.
I already have that in mind.
We're going to volunteer.
And not as a punishment to Ms. Salazar,
No.
but as a compliment for
Yes.
her articulating the concerns,
Absolutely.
of the board.
Absolutely. So, Ms. Salazar, we would like you to work with board staff in drafting a response
Do we need a
letter.
motion?
Do we need a motion for that? Can I have a motion, please?
I so moved.
And do
I second having Katrina do something.
Any further board discussion of that motion?
We discussed what it is you want to include in, I mean, you need to give some detail. You know, obviously, Katrina's fabulous, but I think it's really important that this be, you know, a board discussion and that the board provide some direction to the individual who is.
What's the timing again?
Do you know, Mr. Franzella, the timing?
Other than that they deferred it to give time for NASBA to provide, I want to say, I don't recall that they provided a specific due date. This was recently something they took back in May and got the period of time extended, but I don't recall them saying by July or August or, excuse me. So I agree with Ms. Butu in terms of assisting Ms. Salazar in preparing the letter. If the board is generally in support of what NASBA has raised, that's one way to kind of work through the letter. I would say NASBA's hit on a number of salient points, at least related to some of the subjectivity that we can use to help buttress our letter. And it's very appropriate to work with NASBA when writing these types of letters, working with NASBA since they're advocating consumer protection, working with the boards. It's wholly reasonable to be in support of what NASBA has kind of put out there as a way to kind of put our voice along for it. So
I think that Ms. Salazar stated, certainly a starting point for the comments that we would provide, and if staff could work with Ms. Salazar to start with the comments that she's provided today, and then use that to draft a letter that then our board could consider at the next meeting, that would then, I think give us additional opportunity to consider it and to think of whether there are other issues that have arisen. And, I think that's a starting point, since it doesn't sound like this is an imminent matter.
So to that point, I'm fine bringing it back to the next board meeting, but maybe as an alternative, staff can also be reaching out to the AICPA, NASBA, and whomever to find out when this comment period may conclude. Because if it concludes prior to the board's September meeting conducting, it would be some latitude to be able to issue something in the interim. But if it extends beyond, then staff are happy to work with Ms. Salazar and then bring that letter back.
Of course,
Okay.
yes.
So does,
So my hearing's probably a little worse than Carrie Ann's, but I didn't catch the whole tail end of Katrina's comments, but I got the gist that she was generally in line with the various topics that were outlined in NASBA's February letter. And that was my reaction when I read it from, just a professional and dealing with independence and saying, when in the world would we ever do this and still be independent as to an audit? So if that's what Katrina had in mind, that's certainly my viewpoint, that the topics that have been outlined in this letter before us are relevant from a protection standpoint for us.
okay, and that is, you're hearing that, Ms. Salazar, correct?
I am, and may I just, as I think about the questions and the conversation, I believe we are well past the comment period. This wasn't something that we assessed, and so maybe the appropriate answer might be to simply respond in something in a written form that says we support the letter from NASBA. However, should something be passed, we would need to dig into the complexities that our own laws and rules and regulations would provide, and upon request can provide additional detail about the impact to California. because I don't know that we're asked to dig into rules and regs the way we usually do on our comment letters. This is just to say, generally, does this board see this as good or bad for consumer protection so that it lends support to NASBA as they advocate for clarity and improvement?
Okay, so does that better clarify the motion that we would like to make today, and is it specific enough?
It is for me.
For staff, yeah, does that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm, yes.
All right, so
Yes.
just to confirm, the comment period is already over, is that right?
The comment period is over,
So it's
or
just a
has it,
response.
or has it been extended?
Ms. Salazar is correct, the initial comment period ended in March, however,
Okay.
at their May meeting.
I know, sorry.
The AICPA
Yeah.
extended a period of time to comment. They've extended the comment period to obtain additional information.
Okay.
As to what that deadline is, it hasn't
Okay,
been provided.
so can we use this as our revised motion? And do I have a second?
Keith, my second.
Yeah.
Second, okay. Any other discussion from members, except there's something going on in this building?
I know.
Any
I think
discussion?
it's airplanes.
Any discussion from the public? Okay, please call for the vote. Ms. Reed?
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Abstain.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Katrina Salazar?
Yes.
And Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So motion carried. Thank you. I'm going to do one more agenda item that is very quick, and then maybe we can break for lunch. And that would be Agenda Item 1G, Department of Consumer Affairs Director's Report on Departmental Activities. Ms. Nelson, Assistant Deputy Director, Office of Board and Bureau Services, is a written report. Should have been in your materials, in your blue folders that you got when you came in. Okay, and I think now we'll go ahead and break for lunch. Thank you. And start up again at 1:30? 1:30. Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, hopefully you all had a very enjoyable lunch, and we're ready to get back to our agenda. So, I am going to start with, I am back at Agenda Item 2, and this is the report of the Vice President. For A, B, and C, we have one recommendation. We have a new appointment for the Enforcement Advisory Committee, and this item is to recommend the following: the appointment of Jackson G. Johnson, CPA, to the Enforcement Advisory Committee. The Enforcement Advisory Committee assists the CBA in an advisory capacity with enforcement activities. This includes reviewing closed investigation files, providing technical guidance on open investigations, and participating in investigative hearings. Mr. Johnson has met the appropriate requirements for license renewal and demonstrated the skills and knowledge to serve on the Enforcement Advisory Committee. It is recommended that Jackson G. Johnson, CPA, be appointed as a member of the Enforcement Advisory Committee effective July 25th, 2019 through July 31st, 2021. And I would like to have a motion for that appointment.
So moved.
And a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion between the board members? Is there any public comments? Seeing that there are none, Ms. Reed, please call for the vote.
Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
And Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Very good. So we have a new appointment to the Enforcement Advisory Committee. And I will move on now to Agenda Item 3, Report of the Secretary Treasurer.
And so, did somebody make a funny comment that I didn't
We
hear?
always do.
Oh.
We always do.
Okay. Well, I missed whatever it was. It must have been good. Oh, okay. Okay. So in my report information, that is the 10-month financial report as of April 30th for this fiscal year. It's the most recent actual information and projections, of course, that our staff have. You will see on page 2 that the actual expenditures for the 10 months is $11,725,591, or 81% of the budget, with an approximate surplus of $163,000. Now, I know for 6 months we were at $20,000, 8 months we were $49,500, and 10 months were $163,000. So we've seen some significant changes. Primarily, and we feel that these are more accurate numbers now, because for one thing, board staff have been carefully internally tracking the expenditures, kind of still waiting for our software and our reports to come forth. And they also worked very closely with the Attorney General's office to take a look at what we really have in the works, what will be needed for the rest of the year to get to the end of the year. And so they were really able to better fine-tune costs, and also which makes a lot of sense, as they're nearing year end, they're tightening things up and trying very hard to come within budget, which they're very good about doing all year long, but especially so knowing that they are now cruising into year end. They become very careful with that. Now, I want to point out that there's a chart on page 3, and that has the enforcement expenditures, comparative information for a period of years, and that rightmost figure has enforcement expenditures of $900,815. That only represents Attorney General costs. The correct number is $1,217,870. That's $1,217,870. That includes all enforcement costs. Now, having said, of course, that we're projecting a higher year-end surplus, remembering that issues in enforcement are always subject to change, but as they get closer to year end, it's a little easier to kind of fine-tune. So we need to keep that in mind. Information for year-end 17-18, actual final is still not available. As soon as it is, that will be provided to us. And the governor's budget was released June 27th, 2019, not so long ago, and it is now $16,098,000. That's an approximate increase over the prior year of $1.6 million, or 11%. So much needed funds for everything that we try to do. That's pretty much my report on that information. Do you have any questions for me at this time, or any questions from the public? If not, I would like to move on to Ms. Pierce, who's going to discuss the emergency rulemaking to increase fees by regulation, and our whole discussion about months in reserve and what we need to do about our fee levels. Ms. Pierce.
Thank you. Before I start, I just want to make sure members have a second memorandum for this agenda item, which was included in the second mail-out. It talks about doing an emergency rulemaking up to the $280 fee level. So it was sent subsequent to the original mail-out. So the purpose of this agenda item is to provide the California Board of Accountancy the opportunity to initiate an emergency rulemaking to increase the CBA's license renewal and initial license fees to eliminate the structural imbalance between revenues and expenditures and make sure we maintain solvency. There's presently a legislative proposal contained in Assembly Bill 1521, the CBA Sunset Bill, to establish a minimum fee level for license renewal and initial licensure at $250 and a statutory maximum at $280. Presuming this is approved through the legislature and signed by the governor, the minimum fee level would become effective on January 1, 2020. Due to uncertainty that can occur with legislation and the timing when the legislation may be approved, the CBA is being presented with a recommendation regarding an emergency rulemaking to increase fee levels. An emergency rulemaking, if approved, is anticipated to become effective on January 1, 2020. However, once the Office of Administrative Law approves the rulemaking, we can begin our communications and outreach on the fee levels. The first recommendation, which was included in the original agenda item, is for a fee increase via emergency regulations, and in the agenda item is proposed motion. It requests the CBA make a finding of emergency, which is included as attachment 1, approve the proposed regulatory text as attachment 2, and direct staff to pursue the emergency rulemaking process. On the additional memorandum that I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, we have provided members with a second recommendation for a fee increase. The second recommendation requests the CBA make an additional motion, with the difference being that the license renewal and initial license fee be set at $280, contingent upon the approval of Assembly Bill 1521, which increases the statutory maximum to $280. So the reason for the additional recommendation is to ensure the CBA increases its revenues to address anticipated expenditures. The $250 fee level will increase overall revenue, but the $280 level will ensure that revenues exceed proposed expenditures to ensure the CBA remains solvent and has the resources necessary to carry out its consumer protection mandate. So we're looking actually to do 2 recommendations and move forward with both emergency rulemaking packages. So it would be a motion for the $250 level and also a secondary motion for the $280 level contingent upon the passage of AB 1521. So with that, I will turn it back to Ms. Corrigan, and I'm happy to answer any questions that members may have.
Any questions for Ms. Pierce?
Remind me the history of this. Didn't we already approve a fee? So aside from the $250 that's going into our sunset bill, there was a prior process we went through to get fees to $250. And is that just still going through regulatory review, or?
Yes, that's still pending, going through the regular regulatory process, which we'll need to do anyway, because when we do an emergency rulemaking, you also have to do a regular one, kind of concurrent paths. So that one will continue on and will actually be needed to make the emergency regs final.
That's already in the pipeline.
Yes.
If the sunset bill goes through, then that makes everything else irrelevant, right?
Correct.
Kind of puts that one in place.
Yeah.
And then you're proposing a 280 piece, which would create a whole nother rulemaking process we would have to go through. And I'm just struggling with the question of why. I probably don't object to the emergency rulemaking in the event that our sunset process doesn't go through. But I don't want to regurgitate everything we went through last time, because I think we had the same discussion. And I just feel we've already got 2 options of getting to 250. And it just seems like until we get to something where we start seeing that activity come through and then understand, okay, where are we headed with expenditures and everything, would make the most sense to me. It just seems confusing to me to have all these differing recommendations on the table in parallel fashion.
So the short answer to that
To the long question
is, as we look at the 250 and we project out the revenue that we'll bring in and the anticipated expenditures that we will have, it's insufficient. It's just not going to give us the revenue we need to start building our reserve. And if we don't start building our reserve and we need to draw money from that reserve for an enforcement matter or for some other budget augmentation, the funds will not be there to do that. Our hope was through legislation, we would set it at 280. However, in discussions with legislative staff and members, they were not comfortable going to the 280. And so that's the reason for the dual paths. It would have been probably much smoother if we could have established legislatively 280, so we would only have 1 fee increase. So we're going to continue to try to negotiate that over the next several weeks, but at this point we didn't feel
confident that we could accomplish that. And so the 280 emergency regulatory is sort of a contingency. If we can't get that into statute, then we would come in and do it through regulation, and it would really negate the 250 either in legislation or regulation, because we would have the 280 emergency that would go into effect around the same time legislatively the fee would change.
And the only other thing that, so I appreciate that, there's also another legislative piece that calls for CPI-based increases annually, right?
Like 4%, was it?
Up to, I guess, whatever your statutory limit is. And so in this case, if you went to 280, you'd be limited at 280 and you couldn't go beyond that. But if you went to 250 and 280 was your statutory maximum in the legislation, assuming that passes, then there'd be options for annual CPI-based adjustments that will occur, right? So that'd be another mechanism.
Isn't it every 4 years that bill?
Yeah. And if I could just also just add, in our discussions with legislative staff and members, we have conveyed that we believe the 280 is necessary now, and that going forward down the road, it is likely at some point there'll need to be additional fee increases. And so they're open to us coming back in a future year to ask for the 280 ceiling to be raised if necessary, contingent upon us completing our fee analysis, which we anticipate will occur in January.
And I believe Mr. Familett testified to that effect. Yes?
So I'm a little confused. Does the sunset bill allow for 280? I mean, as written now?
Presently, it's 250 is the floor and 280 is the ceiling. That's how it's drafted now.
Then what was it that the legislators were uncomfortable with?
With putting the floor at 280.
Thank you.
Any further discussion, board members? Do I have a motion?
Yes, just gotta get the proper language. Okay. I wanna make sure I have the right language. If I'm reading this right, I'll make the motion, hopefully I have this is the right document I got, but I'll make the motion to make a finding of the emergency and initiate an emergency rulemaking to increase its license and renewal and initial license fees, to approve the proposed amended regulatory text in CBA Regulations Section 70, direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business and Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. Is that what you need?
The five bullet points?
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at.
I guess just clarification, if that's for the 250 level?
Okay, I'm looking at the recommendation. Hopefully I've got the right one.
Okay.
Just look at memo 1.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe. I don't have memo 2.
So are you looking at the memo dated July 16th?
I'm looking at memo dated July 25th.
Okay. So check this.
Yeah, that's the 250 level.
Because I'm happy to make a motion if I've got the right stuff.
Yeah.
So that's what I have.
So that would be for the 250, which is, and that's the first motion that staff is recommending the board make, a finding of emergency for the 250. So that would be the first.
First motion, okay, so
I second that.
Okay.
any further discussion from board members? Any comments, discussion from the public? Ms. Reed, please call for the vote.
Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan.
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson.
Yes.
Soshi Leon.
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson.
Yes.
And Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that carried. And since you were doing so well, do you want to continue with the next part?
Well, just to clarify, then, that adds
I know.
emergency status to the prior rulemaking that we'd already kind of gotten underway.
Yes, more or less, that would have the effect on that.
It creates some urgency to the prior stuff we already.
I mean, I feel like it's already, yeah, you seem to get it, yeah. Basically, it's, previously, the board had already approved a $250, increase, as a regular rulemaking. This just allows it to go through as an emergency rulemaking. So, and then there is a second, request that's being made to, if AB 20, whatever the 1521 goes through, then to make a separate reg package for 280 instead.
So, you didn't have the motion yet, right? Okay. We didn't have one yet. Ms. Burr, how do you want to?
No, that's fine. I'm just trying to make sure I have the right.
No, that's fine. Good.
So, okay, because I don't have this document, so I'm not really comfortable making that motion since I did not read that.
Would it be helpful for staff to restate
Yeah.
from the presentation
That
the
would be
second
better.
motion?
Correct.
Okay, yeah, because I don't
Correct.
have the
Yeah.
correct language. I did not get the
Yes,
second
and then we
document.
can just make sure that's what we're looking for, please.
So the second recommendation would be make a finding of emergency and initiate an emergency rulemaking to increase its license renewal and initial license fees to $280, contingent upon the approval of Assembly Bill 1521, to approve the proposed amended regulatory text in CBA Regulation 70, which was an attachment to the July 16 memo.
Okay.
Direct staff to submit the text to the Director of the Department of Consumer Affairs and the Business Consumer Services and Housing Agency for review. If no adverse comments are received, authorize the executive officer to make any non-substantive changes to the proposed regulations, take all steps necessary to initiate and complete the emergency rulemaking process, and submit the required documents to OAL, and the CBA also authorizes readoption as needed until permanent regulations are approved by OAL.
I'll move the motion.
Okay.
I second that.
Any further discussion from the board members? Any discussion from the public? Ms. Reed, please call for the vote.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Sochi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines. Nancy Corrigan.
Yes.
Jose Campos,
No.
and Alicia Burhow.
Yes.
Okay, motion carried. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 4A, report of the executive officer, update on staffing.
I have just one very brief staffing update, and that is to announce that my secretary, Allegra Keith, has received a promotion internally within our office, so great congratulations to her, though big shoes to fill. So we are actively recruiting now for a new secretary, and members will be pleased to know that she has filled the position as the board's analyst that processes claims, travel claims, etc. So you'll still be interacting with her in that capacity. And with that, that concludes my report on staffing.
Thank you. Any questions for Patty? Ms. Bowers? No? Moving on then to agenda item 4B, update on the California Board of Accountancy's communications and outreach. Mr. Bone.
Secretary and members, there we are. It's my pleasure to provide a brief update on our recent outreach activities. Since the CBA's May meeting, staff have continued our collaboration with Cal Poly Pomona officials to hold an outreach event during the CBA's upcoming September meeting. In a recent conversation with our contact there, they shared how honored and thrilled they are to welcome us onto their campus on September 26th. To maximize the appeal for students and accommodate their schedules, we have planned a 1-hour outreach program during the noon hour, to be followed in the afternoon by an extended open office hours with CBA licensing staff. This will allow students to drop in at their convenience and receive one-on-one assistance with their transcripts and to receive answers to their individual questions. We've also begun discussions with the university to conduct an evening outreach event in spring 2020 there on campus. On August 3rd, staff will attend a community outreach event and block party hosted by Assemblymember Christopher Holden. This event in Pasadena attracts up to 500 members of the community. Staff will attend to demonstrate the license lookup feature of our website, provide tips to select a CPA appropriate to their needs, and answer questions about the qualifications for licensure. Finally, Madam Secretary, Cal CPA is soon kicking off another round of outreach events on community college campuses. The next event will be September 20 in Chaffey College in Rancho Cucamonga. That concludes my prepared remarks, Madam Secretary. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Is there any questions for Mr. Bone from board members? Anything from the public? Thank you. Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 5. We will have the advisory committee reports. And first, we will have the Enforcement Advisory Committee, Mr. Rosenbaum.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. I've got 2 items. First is the report. The Enforcement Advisory Committee held its last meeting on July 11, 2019 in Los Angeles. At our meeting, we reviewed 2 open case files and held 4 investigative hearings. Our next meeting is October 3rd in Irvine. That concludes the report. The second item, however, is for approval of the 2020 Enforcement Advisory Committee meeting dates. And we will ask you to adopt or modify the proposed meeting dates as follows. February 6, 2020 in Southern California, May 7, 2020 in Southern California, July 9 in Northern California, October 8 in Southern California, and December 3rd in Southern California.
Thank you. So do I have a motion to approve those meeting dates? Do I have a second?
I second.
Any other discussion from board members? Any discussion from public? Ms. Reed, please call for the vote.
Alicia Burhow?
Yes.
Jose Campos?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Sochi Leon?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Carola Nicholson?
Yes.
And Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Thank you. So that motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Rosenbaum.
Thank you very much.
Okay. And there are no reports from the Qualifications Committee or the Peer Review Oversight Committee, so I will move into Agenda Item 6, Report of the Enforcement Chief, Mr. Franzella.
Hi, and thank you. So the activity report, the year before you today is for 11 months worth of data through May 31st, 2019. I'll just step through a couple of the pages. So beginning on page 1, complaints received. We received through those first 11 months just shy of 2,900 complaints. I believe when I looked at the report recently, I think we ended last year with in the neighborhood of about 3,300 complaints for the full fiscal year. But for this report, it was a 33% increase compared to that period last year. Moving on to pages 3 through 5, which deal with investigations and investigations pending. The CBA has seen a slight decrease in the average days to close from 126 to 122 since the last report. Further, when compared to the close of last year, we've seen about a 39% decrease where we were at 201 days last fiscal year. Staff have closed just over 3,400 cases with over 80% in the first 6 months and 92% within the year, and 640 since the last report alone. On page 4, members will note enforcement presently only has 622 cases pending in its inventory, or at least as it was in our inventory at the end of May 31st, which is a significant reduction in inventory compared to prior years that were well over 1,000. There are only 13 cases over 24 months, which is slightly down from the last report, which was 29. Moving on to pages 6 through 9 on discipline. The AG referrals, the CBA has referred 74 matters to the AG this year and has filed 61 pleadings, with the majority of those pleadings being accusations. On page 7 of the report, the CBA has 72 matters pending at the AG's office for over 24 months. One of the cases is dates back for a considerable amount of time. Another one took effect last month, and one is scheduled for hearing in December, and one is a matter we're working with the AG's office in the investigative stages. The CBA has acted on 65 matters through the first 11 months, although I believe another 10 or so took effect in June. Moving on to citation and fine on page 10. As I've been reporting for most of this year, or most of this fiscal year, there's been a sharp increase in the number of citations issued for this fiscal year. Through the first 11 months, we've more than tripled the number of citations compared to prior years. I think we ended up with over 500 at the end of June, and 73% of the total for this report were for the specific violation of the minimum yearly requirement, or the 20 and 12 requirement. Moving on to the newer section in the report, the unlicensed activity. During the first 11 months, the CBA has had 344 complaints of unlicensed activity. We have 151 investigations pending, and to date we've issued 35 citations, closed 385 matters as a result of compliance, and referred 5 matters to local law enforcement or the district attorney. Finally, on page 12, probation monitoring. This is on pages 12 and 13. Presently, we have 168 individuals on probation. We are up to date on all our probation orientations, and we have identified 64 probation violations, the majority of them being cost and quarterly reports. With that, I'll turn discussion back over to Secretary Treasurer and answer any questions members may have.
Any questions for Mr. Franzella? Any questions from the public at all for Mr. Franzella? Very good, thank you. Okay, moving on to agenda item 7, we'll have the report of the licensing chief, Ms. Pierce.
Thank you. The licensing activity report covers 11 months of data for fiscal year 18-19, and I want to highlight just a few items from the report, and then I'm happy to answer any questions members may have. We're processing applications for examination and licensure within 30 days. This is the division's highest priority. Due to vacancies throughout the division, staff from other units have been assisting, and staff throughout the board have offered to work overtime to ensure timeframes remain on target. The management team is working diligently to conduct interviews and fill vacancies within the licensing division, and an update on the recruitment efforts will be provided at the September board meeting. More licensees are using the online credit card payment option for license renewal. During the month of May, I believe that we were up to 27% of all renewals through the online portal. And last, just to make a mention that there's an additional attachment to the licensing activity report. It was sent out to members on Monday, and the attachment states additional information for attachment 1 at the top right. This attachment reflects the California-specific information on the CPA exam performance for the first quarter of 2019, and this supplements the information provided for all jurisdictions. So with that, I will turn it back over to the Secretary Treasurer, and I'm happy to answer any questions members may have.
Do you have any questions for Ms. Pierce? Members? Anything from the public?
I did have a question.
Yes.
I was looking at the overall stats that they begin after the licensing report. And it's statistics on each of the states. And I was just moved by Alabama's pass rate being so very high compared to most of the rest of the states, and definitely higher than California, or I guess South Dakota. Oh, here is also higher. I just wonder, what are these other states doing, you know, that California, you know?
I do not have the answer to that question. I know they have a very small population of candidates,
So
less
is
than
it a matter
200.
of a ratio? It's just that it's fewer than taking the test and the pass?
We don't.
Yeah, we don't really have a way of assessing the other states, whether it's their educational programs or their preparatory programs, or a ratio based on staff, just population. We just wouldn't have that information available.
Okay, anything further?
This tracks it by the state the candidate took the test in, right? Who they registered to take the test through.
Who they registered through, yes.
they might go to school in California, but take the test in Alabama, or they might, so there's other cuts of that information that does it by schools. I think I've seen that, or there's different cuts at the data. Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard to
figure
compare
out.
and analyze. Yeah, definitely. Anything further from Ms. Pierce? Members or public? Thank you.
Excuse my ignorance, but
Yes. Yes.
is there a uniform test that's given in all 55 jurisdictions?
It's the uniform CPA exam.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Pierce. Okay. So I'm going to move on to agenda item 8, which are the various minutes. We'd have to kind of take A first, the adoption of the minutes of the May 16th California Board of Accountancy meeting. Do I have a motion to adopt those minutes?
I second that.
If I have a first and a second, I have any further discussion from board members? Any discussion from the public? Ms. Reed, please call for the vote.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan.
Yes.
Jose Campos.
Yes.
And Alicia Burhoff.
Yes.
Thank you. So that carries. And then we can do agenda items 8, B, C, D, E, and F as another motion of acceptance. That would be for the May 16th minutes of the Enforcement Program Oversight Committee, the Committee on Professional Conduct, and the Legislative Committee, the May 2nd for the Enforcement Advisory Committee, and the September 20th for Mobility Stakeholders Group. Do I have a motion to accept those?
So moved.
And a second? Any further discussion from board members? Yes.
I had a question on the minutes for the Enforcement Advisory Committee. I just wanted to mention there's a small typo where the list of members are, it says MSG member. But in fact, it's the Enforcement Activity.
So we have a small correction that will be made to those minutes. Anything further from board members? Anything from the public on this item? Hearing none, Ms. Reed, please call for the vote.
Alicia Burhoff,
Yes.
Jose Campos, Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez.
Yes.
Carola Nicholson.
Yes.
And Michael Savoy.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carries. On to agenda item 9, other business. Now, for the first two items, A being American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and B being the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, there are no committee reports for those. But under B2, meetings of NASBA by staff or board members that attended the meeting, and that is 2A. I can go ahead and report on that. That was the June 18th through 20th in Salt Lake City, and Ms. Salazar, Mr. Famlet, and myself, and some others. Cal CPA was represented there as well. We spoke some this morning about some of the topics, but let me just give you my experience of it. I did attend the first day as a new board member, and so it was quite extensive orientation and covering NASBA's mission, their strategic plan, their ongoing activities. We also participated in a very interesting role-playing skit, or more than one, I should say, where we learned the protocols for board meetings, disciplinary matters, due process, that sort of thing. And so it was interesting to do that, and kind of hands-on learning. So that was very good. Highlights of the remaining couple of days. Of course, evolution of the CPA profession and some of what we spoke about earlier in Ms. Pierce's presentation. We heard from Ms. Salazar. Their task force is charged with education, examination, and experience as being very critical areas. They're examining the 150-hour requirement and stressing the importance of that. I guess there's a lot of kickback. You have 120 hours and you can sit for the exam in some cases, but it takes 150 to be licensed. Why is that? So there are questions that are being kicked around. Another is focusing on incoming students' attitudes towards the accountancy
profession or accounting as a major and selling accountancy, as a profession to those students and doing our best to do that. Concern about the lack of specificity of hours, strengthening the intent of the 150-hour requirement, looking to eliminate so many soft courses and how to better accommodate those transferring in from other majors, changing majors, but how to be specific about the 150 hours and make them more core. I guess they're looking into that. Expanding, to include technology was a big topic throughout. Studying barriers to entry that result in a shortage of graduates seeking licensure. And so looking at many aspects of the profession and also reviewing the requirements to sit for the exam. So that was a big area. So the recommendation was to definitely keep the 150-hour requirement as it gives the breadth of education that is important given the diverse nature of the profession. So they're very strong for that. Staying with a single CPA exam, but updating the core to include technology. How to get people with IT degrees, for example, as one example, to become CPAs, but avoiding a two pathway to licensing. So traditional licensing versus technology related. And of course, lots of work and discussion, I'm sure over months, years, will take place in that regard. And then focusing on course content, career enhancing coursework rather than specific coursework. And considering, again, additional content, such as adding technology to acceptable courses for that degree and ultimate licensure. We covered anti-regulation battle, the importance of having responsible licensing standards for accounting compared to some other occupational licenses. Important comment is that 50 years ago, 1 in 20 Americans needed a license to work. And today, that number is closer to 1 in 3. I'm not sure whose study that was, but that's what they said. We had a presentation from consultants by the name of ARPL, Alliance for Responsible Professional Licensing, and truly promoting the definition of profession versus occupation, and promoting a responsible, balanced approach to professional licensing and the importance of high standards, rigorous education, and extensive experience. So we had a presentation. Mr. Brackens from the AICPA was there amongst others, reinvigorating the peer review program, keeping up the quality of peer reviewers, and expediting peer reviewer removal for poor performance or lack of performance, recognizing the need for greater subject matter experts, adding an issue advisory hotline to resolve issues during peer reviews rather than after the fact, and letting them become, a horrible battle. New peer reviewer training requirements, enhancing accountability by firms for non-compliance. These repeat failures are starting to get tougher with them, ejecting them from the program, and whatever else they are coming up with. Focusing on high-risk engagements and, of course, enhanced oversight. So that was the peer review program. We had a report from the Examination Review Board. They are charged with reviewing, evaluating, and reporting on the CPA exam process. We received their 2018 annual report that told us that we can rely on the CPA exam process to accomplish what it's supposed to be accomplishing. CPA exam developments. Currently, the exam is updated every quarter for technical changes in standards. And it had been being revamped like every 7 years, and they obviously want to start doing that more concurrently because things are changing so rapidly in the profession. We can't wait 7 years, or we can't wait a long period of time. Big focus on technology, how to accomplish 16 hours of exam and include the needed topics without extending the length of the exam. So that's quite a challenge. So there will be an exposure draft released in late 2019 or early 2020 for comment. And obviously certain of us can go on and participate in that practice analysis study that's being conducted. They talked about their program for tracking licensee, CPE compliance and that sort of thing. I believe that our staff may be looking into whether it makes sense for California to do that or not, and resolve any issues that may arise. The meeting was very interesting. I got to interact with other board members. Some of the boards are only 5 to 7 members. They may have 1 or 2 staff at most. gave me an even greater sense of appreciation than I already have for our staff, realizing, though, that we have a huge population of CPAs that they don't. But many of those board members have to be very, very hands-on. We're able to look to very qualified staff to accomplish what we do. So I really say, wow, I'm happy I am where I am, so I appreciated that. I don't know if you have any questions for me on that, but it was a very worthwhile experience. If not, I'm going to go on to agenda item 10, where am I? 10B. Well, I want to check in with Ms. Nicholson as to whether there is anything on, so I am at 9.2C. Anything on from the Diversity Committee? Nothing to report at this time. Okay. So now on to agenda item 10, report on the Mobility Stakeholder Group and other board committee reports. So starting with A, Mobility Stakeholder Group, Mr. Campos?
Sure thing. Starting with 10A1, the MSG was pleased to welcome 3 new members to the committee that joined the recurring members of myself, Katrina Salazar, and Dominic and Stuart Waldman. But joining them is Jeff DeLizer, who we all know from the EAC committee, PROC, the various, and his retiring resolution that we had earlier today. But he's been indoctrinated into a new committee here. Jim, what's his last name? Sanji or Sanji?
Sanji.
Jim Sanji joined, and he's also someone I know I've had the pleasure of interacting with at the EAC. And then Sean Lewis, new to this process, but who works for the National Federation of Independent Business in California. And so it was great to have a meeting, since the last time we met was September of last year. Topic 10A3 was an update on possible action regarding the California Board of Accountancy Directive Plan related to the ongoing determinations of state substantial equivalency to enforcement best practices and disciplinary disclosures. Staff provided an update on the CBA directive plan for the continued review of ongoing determination of state substantial equivalency to enforcement best practices and disciplinary disclosures. Basically, the plan that was adopted by the CBA back in September of 2018 was a risk-based approach to the evaluation process, and really was reaffirmed by the committee as a good continuing framework. Mr. Franzella provided the committee highlights undertaken by staff on the following areas. Conduct a review of NASBA's legislative support website to monitor legislation in other states. Secondly, review of websites of other state boards of accountancy and CPA Verify to ensure use of disciplinary flags and to determine the CBA that maintains the appropriate disclosures and disclaimers on its website. 3, monitor cases referred by the CBA to other state boards of accountancy to ensure that proper disciplinary action is taken. 4th, review pre-notification forms received by the CBA to determine how other states handle SEC and PCAOB referrals. And then 5th, report on peer review practices of other state boards of accountancy. There was no required action on this item, and the MSG felt we were moving in the right direction. Topic 10A4 was the mobility activity report, which presented 5 months worth of data on a calendar basis through May 31st, and it provided some statistical information on various areas associated with California's mobility program. And at the MSG's request from a prior meeting, staff included a section in the report related to NASBA activities. This was informational and no action was required. That concludes the report.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Campos? Very good, thank you. Moving on to agenda item B, then Enforcement Program Oversight Committee reported the July 25th, our meeting today.
And then discussion and possible action regarding licensees who completed the general experience requirement providing attestation-related services and associated enforcement activities. So the staff responded to a request that we placed on our agenda previously from the May meeting, and they provided an overview of several items in the paper, gave high-level information related to the experience requirement for licensure, gave examples of recent enforcement actions the CBA has taken related to individuals who completed the general experience requirement and performed attest-related work, and highlighted a set of policy topics associated with accounting firms providing attest-related work when the accounting firm is owned solely by licensees who have only completed the general experience requirement. We expressed concerns regarding consumer expectations and knowledge of a CPA with or without the ability to sign reports on attest engagements. Members also raised concerns about various policy issues, including those outlined in the materials prepared by staff, and also potential insurance and liability policies. So the EPOC is recommending that the CBA assign the Committee on Professional Conduct to review the policy issues associated with this topic for future deliberation. And that being a fully made motion, please call for the vote.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
Jose Campos,
Yes.
and Alicia Verhow.
Yes.
Thank you. And that motion carried. Moving on to agenda item C, Committee on Professional Conduct, Mr. Jacobson.
Thank you. We approved the minutes of the last meeting. As to item 2, discussion and possible action regarding continuing education reciprocity. That was deferred to a future date, continued to a future date, yet to be determined. That concludes my report, and boy, were we tired of it.
So I wouldn't think that there are any questions for Mr. Jacobson, but if so, let it roll. Okay, agenda item D, Legislative Committee, Ms. Molina Lopez?
Yes, thank you. Our legislative committee meeting happened this morning at the start of the day. We covered the CBA 2019 legislative tracking chart. This was a written report, but staff noted that AB 613 is now a 2-year bill, which is a correction from what was written on the report. The next item was an update, discussion, and possible action on legislation, which the CBA has taken a position on. The LC deferred items 3N and 3P relating to cannabis to the CBA meeting later in the afternoon, in the morning. Further, to assist the LC efficiently complete its business, staff did not make a recommendation on the following items, which have not been amended since the prior CBA meeting. These items were AB 63, 193, 312, 476, 535, 544, 613, 1140, 1271, 1545, and SB 53. Again, these items had not been amended, and there was no change in the position from the prior motion. The next item was Assembly Bill 802, reports to the legislature, statewide open data portal. Staff reported that this bill requires state and local agencies to submit reports to the legislature electronically rather than by paper. Recent amendments require the Department of Technology to establish and maintain a statewide open data portal and requires agencies as specified to post data to that open data portal. Staff recommended the CBA maintain its watch position on AB 802. The LC did not take an action on this item. The next bill we spoke about was SB 1076, Criminal Records Automatic Relief. Staff stated that the bill would establish a new administrative process operated by the Department of Justice that would grant arrest and criminal conviction record relief to eligible individuals. Presently, between 10,000 and 13,000 CBA licensees have a non-active license status and also have not submitted to a criminal background check. If one of those licensees returned to active status but previously qualified for criminal record relief under the bill, the CBA may never become aware of those convictions. Staff recommended the CBA change its watch position to an oppose unless amended position. Ms. Hines requested that staff inquire to determine whether other boards within the DCA have adopted a position or have concerns. The LC recommends the CBA adopt an oppose unless amended position on AB 1076, requesting the bill be amended to address concerns regarding the CBA's current non-active licensees who have not submitted a criminal conviction background check. This is a fully formed motion, does not require a second, and I will turn this back to Madam Secretary for discussion and action.
So do I have a motion to that effect?
It's already moved.
Oh, that's right, it's from the committee, so we can just call for the vote unless there's any discussion.
I have a comment. As I understand the staff's recitation of the facts, this bill wouldn't change anything substantively. In other words, someone with a criminal conviction can now, today, go into Superior Court and go through the Superior Court process to have that, whatever the terminology is, sealed or expunged, thank you, to have that expunged. If this passes, the person wouldn't have to go to Superior Court. It would be administratively done through at the Attorney General's office. So my reason I support this bill personally is that it seems that now there is a barrier to being able to get something that you have a right to get, and that is going to Superior Court rather than just having it done administratively. And the barrier is, I gotta tell you, that to navigate the Superior Court requires a lawyer. If you want to, if you want to be successful. So we're putting, and when that requires money. So we're putting a cost, the necessity for the retention of a lawyer on some people, on people today. This just takes away that cost and that necessity. And if we're about removing barriers to get to the same thing that we have, that our licensees have the right to get, then I think we should support them.
If I may, thank you, Mr. Jacobson. The portion of the language in this bill that we are concerned about is would affect our licensees that we don't have criminal backgrounds on or fingerprints on. And so that is the portion of the bill I feel that we are opposed to. But I think removing barriers and that, I think I would support that as well.
Wouldn't all of that regarding the fingerprints and that sort of thing remain the same whether the bill is passed or not?
Yes.
It's just a matter of how the expungement takes place.
So it is required. I think Mr. Bone may help me express this better, but I believe there is no requirement for the people that are under inactive status who we didn't collect information on. Then they become active. There's nothing there for them if they do have a previous criminal conviction. If they don't disclose it themselves, there's no way for us to find out. Mr. Bone, help.
Just to add on to Ms. Molina Lopez's comments, yes, so the population, the concern rather, Mr. Jacobson, that we are noted is that if licensees happened to be in a non-active status when our retroactive fingerprint requirements took effect in 2014, and they persisted in that non-active status to this day. We do not have, for those individuals, we do not have their fingerprints on file. Excuse me, they've not submitted to a criminal background check, and therefore, when one is arrested or convicted, we don't receive that information. If the bill is passed and they had a conviction that was eligible for relief under the bill, and then it was granted, and then they pursued, they said, okay, I wish to become active, at that point they would provide their fingerprints. If that relief or expungement was granted during that gap, then the board would be unaware of if relief were granted. Does that help answer your question, sir?
It does, but if I may, so let's say the bill passes. And then am I correct that doesn't affect whether their records, their criminal records are on record, if you will. And it doesn't affect whether they can be expunged. It only affects how they can be expunged.
I'm not sure if I'm following your question entirely. So the bill does not establish new criteria, does not establish new eligibility criteria that a person may meet in order to get this relief. It changes the process, the mechanism whereby such relief is granted. And as you noted earlier, right now it's a judicial petition-based process, and you made many of the arguments that the proponents make for the bill about cost and difficulty for individuals. But this transforms that process into an administrative process to do all of that work seamlessly in the background.
If I may, all it seems that this bill does is make it easier, cheaper, less barriers to get to a right that people already have.
So the one thing that I wanted to point out is this bill is somewhat inconsistent with AB 2138 in that they specifically carved out. AB 2138 is the denials and how we can deny people licenses. Okay. There was a carve out specifically for CSLB, Contractor State Licensing Board, and CBA regarding certain crimes that we can access 7 years since their conviction. Well, there's the overlap from that bill and this bill basically eliminates, like CBA wouldn't have access to those financial crimes that have been expunged or automatically lifted from this person's record under the bill that we're discussing today. So that's kind of a little bit of more, something else to be considered in terms of how you feel about this bill.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't that be the case anyways if the licensee went through the Superior Court process?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, well then, yeah, I'll let Dominic answer that question.
Yeah, I don't see the CSLB overlap related to 2138 in as much as if there's access to that information on their record, it's allowed to be used by the board in consideration of a denial. If it's been expunged, there's already a specific code section within 480 that eliminates the board's ability to use those expunged convictions for the purposes of a denial. I think maybe to your question earlier, yes, there's a mechanism for it just to go from a procedural process to an administrative process. I think the issue really is more along the lines of the Corey records have changed one of the elements of this bill is presently you continue to get expunged record information on a Corey so that you have an opportunity to kind of look at it. And while you may be not in a position to take action on the conviction, if there was something substantive within that underlying Corey information that they were convicted of something that this board felt was so dangerous that we wanted to proof up our own investigation, you would have access to that information to at least assess what that conviction was. Under the provisions of this bill, I believe after the expungement, it's no longer put on the Corey information at all. So you have no record of any of the conviction. And again, as it applies to the applicant, I don't think that's our concern. It's to this small group of people who have subjected themselves to licensure with us, who happen to be in a carve-out window of time where we didn't have that information, and they should otherwise be reporting it to us, but haven't. And now that they want to come back, if it got expunged off their record, we will have never known that there was something in their record that at least required us to look at it. We should have looked at and potentially made a decision on whether or not enforcement action was warranted or not.
Please excuse my ignorance, but I only know that Corey is someone's name.
Sorry. The criminal offender record information sheet, it's the rap sheet that you get. Presently, it shows expunged information. Under this bill, it would eliminate all the expunged information as well. So there is another practical application to that.
So, if this bill passes, is it that the CPA would no longer be entitled to the rap sheet on anyone, whether they've expunged or not expunged, or is it the same thing as it is today, it's just the manner of expungement?
It would, the bill prevents licensure boards like ours from gaining access to records related to expunged, relieved, dismissed convictions.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other comments?
So of the 10 to 13,000 potential population we quantified during the meeting, this would only end up applying to those who specifically took action either through Superior Court currently or through this administrative process, and where it was accepted that they would have their records removed or what have you.
Yes, in the sense, at least with the administrative side, I don't think it's really, there's not a whole lot of discretion. It's, if you meet.
You apply when it's done?
You don't even apply. DOJ does it on the bill mandates that the Department of Justice query its records. Anybody who meets, let's say, X, Y, and Z, then it's automatic.
Okay.
So, again, I think there is, when we did the retroactive fingerprinting, just for context, we did find a number of people who failed to report conviction and important conviction information to us during a window of time. And we kept a carve out for the inactive group mainly because our focus at the time was we wanted to get that population who were going to be active. And there's still a group of people who may have some serious felonies, serious misdemeanors, some financial-based crimes that we, for that inactive carve-out group that we don't presently have, that this bill, if they fall under any of these sections that provide relief, that they meet these checklists, that we'll never know about at any particular time. And I think that's where our narrow focus is, not the entirety of the bill, because that policy seems to already have been, it's just gone from procedural to administrative, so the policy seems to be there. It's now just a matter of this limited group who have already subjected themselves to our jurisdiction, making sure that we're informed and the consumers are informed, and we've had an opportunity to look and consider those past criminal activities. So.
Just one brief follow-up. How likely is an inactive to become convicted?
It's common.
That first time?
I would not even venture a guess, but it's not uncommon that individuals go from active to inactive, and it just based on any number of factors. People now going back to get a particular job that requires you to have an active license that was inactive for a period of time, and it's incredibly simple to go from inactive to active. It's 80 hours of CE requirements, and it's just kind of, it's not a very complicated process once you go through the renewal cycle. So. Yes, for the inactive group, or if they happen to be in the retired status during that same window of time. So we do catch them or capture that information. This bill would affect that group as well, obviously, as they're coming back in. But anybody who sits in that inactive group forever, we never had that information until such time as the board potentially does something about that. So,
my recommendation is to oppose unless amended, so that, I don't know how to word this, so that we have access to the
Well, that's the motion that's already been made by
Right.
the committee.
So the committee has made a motion, and if we have all of our discussion out there, I think we're ready to call for the vote.
But can you repeat the motion?
Yes, the LC recommends the CBA adopt an oppose unless amended position on AB 1076, requesting the bill be amended to address concerns regarding the CBA's current non-active licensees who have not submitted to a criminal conviction background check.
Let's call for the vote.
Okay. Jose Campos?
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan?
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines?
Yes.
Dan Jacobson?
Yes.
Soshi Leon?
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez?
Yes.
Corolla Nicholson?
Yes.
And Michael Savoy?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Please continue.
The next assembly bill that we covered was AB 1181. This is for charitable organizations. Was this the one, the Dynamax one? Patty? Oh, it's late. Okay, you'll tell me. Okay, so staff stated that the bill requires the financial records relating to certain solicitations for charitable purposes be maintained according to specific accounting standards apart from generally accepted accounting principles. Staff and Mr. Jason Fox with the California Society of CPAs discussed recent advocacy efforts on AB 1181. Staff recommended the CBA maintain its opposed position on the bill. The LC did not take action on this item, but directed staff to submit a revised letter of opposition in light of recent amendments to the legislature. The next item, 10D3M, was Assembly Bill 1521. This is our sunset bill, the accountancy CBA bill. Staff indicated that since the prior CBA meeting, AB 1521 was amended to establish that $250 is the minimum and $280 is the maximum amount the CBA may charge for its license renewal and initial licensure fee. Staff recommended the CBA maintain its support position on the bill. The LC did not take an action on this item. Next, we had Senate Bill 601, State Agencies License Fee Waiver. Staff stated that this bill authorizes a state agency to establish a process for a person or business displaced or experiencing a hardship due to a declared emergency to request a waiver or reduction of certain fees. Staff recommended the CBA maintain its support position on this bill. The LC did not take action. Then we had Assembly Bill 5, Worker Status, Employees and Independent Contractors.
Excuse me, I have to recuse myself from this because I told Patty before as a independent contracting adjunct professor of law. It's kind of a minor. The minor goes to recuse.
Okay,
Something comes
thank
up.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, that's fine. You can go ahead and continue.
AB 5, Worker...
Are we okay on quorum?
Oh, we just lost our quorum.
But as soon as he comes back, he'll be fine again. But because this is AB5 and the recommendation from the committee was to watch it, unless the remaining board members want to do something other than watch,
Okay.
you're not going to be taking
But-
any action on it, presumably anyway. So you're fine.
Okay.
You know.
Okay.
I mean,
So should I...
you can. It'll be just informational only, and we'll just move on after that.
So for your information, staff indicated that this bill would codify the California Supreme Court's 2018 Dynamax decision that establishes revised criteria that classify workers as either an independent contractor or employee. Staff further stated that the bill contains certain exceptions, including one that applies to accountants. Accountants whose working conditions meet a specified 9-point criteria are not bound by the Dynamax decision. Although the CBA on occasion contracts with outside CPAs to consult on enforcement matters, staff do not expect AB5 to impact these practices. We're not going to take a
Well,
vote
that-
on this, so
It'll
that
be
So-
pulled over to a future meeting if the board wants to.
Information only.
Yeah.
So should we have Mr. Jacobson?
Yeah, and
We're
he
going to move
didn't-
to the
I
next
mean,
topic.
Yeah, I
let-
think he needed to step out anyway, but he didn't technically need to step out.
Yeah,
He just
ask him
wouldn't
to
have been
come,
able
we're
to
ready
vote
for
on
the
it.
next item.
had he been in the room though, we would have had a quorum.
Yeah, yeah, but you still couldn't, I mean, well,
But
yes,
he
but.
still had to step out.
Yeah, but it requires, action of the board requires a majority of the board, and without him, you don't have a majority.
We didn't have the majority, yeah.
So,
So,
it's okay, I mean, I'm hoping that the board is satisfied just maintaining a watch position, and you'll be watching it anyway, so.
Okay. So moving on,
yeah, so that's the thing, we're
Yeah, but
supposed to
watch
vote.
position and no position is almost the same thing. Yeah, you can bring it back to the next meeting and talk about it in more detail.
So there's no motion on the table then?
Well,
no.
I get,
Because the committee made,
Well, there is a motion by the committee, but it's going to be postponed
okay.
for the next meeting. Yeah, just hold on.
okay, so we're going to postpone it to the
Yes,
next, your recommendation will come back around the next meeting, September. Okay, thank you.
Next item, 10D4B, Assembly Bill 1343, Private Post-Secondary Education, California Private Post-Secondary Education Act of 2009. According to staff, AB 1343 requires certain private colleges operating in California to meet specified spending criteria relative to the amounts of funding they receive from federal agencies. To establish their compliance with the bill, staff stated that affected private colleges may submit to the Bureau of Private Post-Secondary Education an audit or audited financial statements by a CPA attesting that the institution meets the spending requirements. Staff discussed that the types of accounting engagements contemplated by the attestation language of the bill may not be included within the scope of the audits that may be performed in the described situation. The LC recommends that the CBA approve a watch position on Assembly Bill 1343. This is a fully formed motion and does not require a second. I will turn it back to Madam Secretary for the vote.
Okay, any discussion? If not, please call for the vote, Ms. Reed.
Michael Savoy,
Yes.
Carola Nicholson,
Yes.
Luz Molina Lopez,
Yes.
Soshi Leon,
Yes.
Dan Jacobson,
Yes.
Carrie Ann Farrell Hines.
Yes.
Nancy Corrigan,
Yes.
and Jose Campos.
Yes.
Thank you. And our last agenda item was 10D5A through N. This is a review and possible consideration of positions on legislation the CBA is monitoring. Staff reported that items A through N are bills being monitored by staff and include spot bills and legislation related to the cannabis industry. The LC did not take an action on these items. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Okay. Very good, thank you. So we're going to move now to agenda item 11, which is closing business. And 11A is time for public comments. And seeing that there are none, I need to know in agenda item B then if we have any items for future California CBA meetings that we'd like to place on the agenda. Anybody? Okay, hearing that there are none, we are ready to go into closed session. Thank you.